Welcome to Comment with me, George Galloway, here on Press TV, still the voice of the voiceless. Comment is the big conversation, can even be the great debate, but it can only be either if you join in. That's why, above all, I need your telephone calls. Here's how it works. You call us, we'll call you back, establish a clear line, and remember, if you get on the television with me, the volume on your television has to be down at 0. Otherwise, I'll have to move swiftly on because no one will understand either of us. The number to call then is 44208-601-4555. You can SMS the show too on 447800008066, and the best of those will come up here on the comment wall if they're good enough. Ditto the emails, comment@presstv.co.uk. You can even tweet us, comment_PressTV. And the best of those will come up here on the comment wall. Now, as most of the viewers of this show are not in Britain but around the world, let me explain that on the 23rd of June, less than 4 weeks from now, Britain will go to the ballot box in a referendum on whether or not Britain should leave the European Union. It's 50-50, although in the last couple of days, the opinion polls have turned in favour of leaving, what's called Brexit, British exit from the European Union. The elite throughout Europe, indeed throughout most of the world, is in panic stations, because a British exit from the European Union could very well bring about the final collapse of the ailing, flailing, increasingly vicious outfit known as the European Union. Let me tell you what this is not about. It is not about internationalism. You don't get any more internationalists than me, and I'm campaigning for Britain to leave the European Union. Neither is it about nationalism. Nothing nationalist about me, neither Scottish nor British. I love Europe. I love its people. I would love to be in ever closer union with its people, but not in this EU. You see, this EU is the political expression of two things. The first is it's the political expression of NATO. Indeed, its seeds are in exactly the same piece of the garden. After the Second World War, the beginning of the Cold War, the need to confront the then Soviet Union, now, of course, just Russia, the political and economic expression of NATO was the European Coal and Steel Union, which became the European Economic Community, which has become the politically ambitious European Union. That's the first thing that the EU is an expression of. And the second thing is that it's an expression of neoliberal economics. The bankers, the model of finance capital made famous or infamous over recent years following the crash in the banking system and in the finance sector. That's what it's all about. Germany gets to be the industrial power, Britain gets to be the financial power, and the people are the losers all round. I declared last summer, at the height of the crisis in Greece, when the Greek people were being ground into the dust in the name of neoliberal orthodoxy, told that they must give their blood to satisfy the bankers I declared that I could not ask anyone to vote for such a European Union. Now, of course, there are all kinds of people on both sides of this argument. There are left-wing people campaigning to remain in the European Union, and there's David Cameron and George Osborne, the British finance minister, who are as right-wing as it comes. And on the exit side, like me, there are people on the left and there are people on the right. There are people who hate internationalism. There are people who very definitely are British nationalists. But it's a binary choice. You're either in or you're out, and you don't get to choose who's on the same side as you. Now, I said they were in panic stations. How do we measure that? Well, David Cameron, who's made a political fortune out of flirting with Europhobia, all the Tories, almost all of them, were guilty of that. David Cameron, who 6 months ago said that he would be quite happy leading a British government out of the European Union, is now threatening the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. War, famine, pestilence, and disease, he claims, will follow for the British people if we dare to vote to leave the European Union. So hysterical has the scaremongering and the lying become that actually it's beginning not just to have diminishing returns, but positively to be backfiring. And of course, you've only got to ask yourself this question: if the consequences were as apocalyptic as David Cameron now claims, why would we be having this referendum in the first place? Let's take the first caller, the editor of Politics First, Marcus Papadopoulos, who's in London. Marcus Papadopoulos in London. Forgive me, Marcus, go ahead.
Hello, George. I have to say I dislike the European Union. Why? Because the European Union has shown a complete disregard for international law, for the UN Charter. The EU played a leading role in destroying the old Yugoslavia when it destroyed the sanctity of international.
Good point, Marcus. It's not off. Marcus, that point's not often brought out. They're always telling us that the European Union has kept the peace, except for the wars in Iraq and Libya and Afghanistan and Yugoslavia and the Ukraine and. Go ahead, Marcus.
Yeah, I mean, they destroyed the sanctity of internationally recognized borders when they recognized Slovenia, Croatia and Bosnia, and that ignited the civil wars in those countries. It then played a leading role in tearing an integral part of Serbia away, Kosovo and Metohija. And today, the EU works hand in hand with NATO in attempting to weaken and isolate Russia on its western borders in Europe. So for that reason alone, I don't think there should be any love for the European Union. And least of all, let's not forget what the European Union did in regard to Libya, what the European Union is doing in regard to Syria. They are complicit in radical terrorism in both countries. And therefore, quite frankly, no one should give them a vote on June the 23rd.
And they're big on sanctions, Marcus, aren't they? They love sanctions, the European Union. They've sanctioned Iran, they've sanctioned Russia.
Yes, and the EU projects itself as a beacon of civilization, a beacon of human rights. And yet, how many Iraqi deaths have they got on their hands? How many deaths of Serbian people through the sanctions they placed on Serbia in the 1990s have they got on their hands? No, it's a complete facade that the European Union is a beacon of democracy, freedom and human rights. Actually, in reality, it's the complete opposite.
Yes, and they're an expensive bunch too, aren't they? Britain is sending to Brussels £350 million a week, every week. That's £1.25 billion every month, at the same time as cutting public services, laying waste to the economy in the north and in the former industrial areas, watching industry after industry go down the Swanee, while we're sending £350 million every week to the bloated European operation in Brussels. Marcus?
And I'd also would add, I think some of that money has actually gone to supporting repugnant people in Syria, for example, in Ukraine, and also in Libya. Let's not forget the EU and NATO in Libya, in Syria.
In fact, the EU led the way on Libya, didn't they? They actually pushed Obama into war in Libya.
Yes, they did. And once again, whatever people thought of Muammar Gaddafi, he was the legitimate sovereign leader of Libya. Whether you liked him or not is irrelevant. That's how international law works and the UN Charter works. But like you said, the EU played a leading role in getting America to give its consent so that Britain and France could militarily intervene. And by them militarily intervening, it's helped to cause a migrant crisis, and then they turned their focus to Syria. And that is the ultimate reason for the migrant crisis affecting Europe, because they have turned Syria upside down. Syria used to be one of the safest countries in the world. You could travel from Damascus to Homs to Aleppo, including a woman on her own. Well, you can't do that now because the West once again has got involved and has virtually destroyed that country.
So what do you think about Cameron's increasing desperation? Do you agree with me that it's because they fear they might actually lose this referendum? And of course now you've got Tory MPs demanding that he stand down, and the Tory party is tearing itself to pieces because most Tories want to leave, and Cameron's extremism in pressing the case to remain it's making his position untenable, isn't it?
Well, it was inevitable that the so-called debates we're having in Britain over the EU would descend into an internal Conservative Party issue, where bitter rivalries between Cameron and Johnson are being played out. And also, let's remind ourselves, it's costing £50 million to the British taxpayer to hold this referendum, which is ultimately about an internal Conservative Party issue. And
it's like the Eton public school dining room with the poshest boys throwing bread rolls at each other.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I've already said I don't like the European Union, but in England, in Scotland, it's different. But in England, we're not having a proper debate about economics and about other issues related to that. What we're hearing from Conservative MPs is about the White Cliffs of Dover, about the Dunkirk fighting spirit. I mean, how juvenile can you get? How unintelligent can you get? And on top of that, I would say that Cameron never thought he'd have to hold this referendum because he didn't believe he would win that general election in 2015. So that says a lot about Cameron's leadership, not only of the Conservative Party, but also of Britain.
What's your prediction then, Marcus? What's the score?
I think it's going to be so tight, but something tells me, and I could be wrong, but something tells me that the Brexit campaign could just pip it.
I feel that, and if they don't, if they just lose it, well, it won't be a referendum, it'll be a never-endum. It'll go on and on and on till the next referendum.
And at the expense of the British taxpayer.
Indeed. Marcus Papadopoulos, editor of Politics First, thanks for joining us and kicking off the show. Let's go to Aberdeen in Scotland and talk to Zachary. Go ahead, Zachary.
Yeah, good evening, Mr. George Galloway.
Good evening.
Before I give my opinion regarding the EU, please let me to say that my condolences for the martyrdom of the Imam Khomeini to the Muslim world and especially Iranian nation, and that the world community must come to the point that they go towards the Islam, not against the Islam. Those that are NATO and America and the Zionism and the Wahhabis, that they are against the true Islam. They are against the humanity. And the international problems will be solved if the whole people of the world go towards Imam Khomeini, Imam the line of Imam Khomeini and Imam Khamenei. This is the way that we can save the international community from the war after the war by the NATO. And the British should leave Europe, should EU, because this is, as the previous speaker says, this is not about the better life for the European people. It's about the power against the other nations, against the other governments, against the other people, colonialism, jingoism, colonialism, barbarism, and exploiting other nations. This is what is all about NATO. What they have done against the Libya, it was crime against humanity. What they have done against the Syrian people, Syrian nations, is crime against humanity in the history of the mankind. What is they are doing against the Iraqi people, against the Iranian nation, is the most barbaric crime against humanity that in the last 30 years, Europe, Israel, Zionists, and America, and this Arab Wahhabis, they have done against Islam and the Muslims and the Middle East.
Okay, Zachary, we got that point. Well made, powerful. Bobby is in London. Bobby, should Cameron quit over all this?
Hello, George?
Yes, Bobby, you're on the air. Should Cameron quit?
I said, I'm going to say to the actual question about should he quit over lying, no, because on both sides of the argument, it's been pretty hysterical. Not from everybody, but you've heard people on the Leave side saying, issues, refusing to answer about issues to do with Ireland or immigration, because the Leave side's filled with some pretty strange people. But also on the Remain side, they act as if the EU hasn't caused any problems. It is walking us into war with Russia for no good reason. They've made up lies about us losing 10% of our GDP. That's more than the recession than the Great Crash in 1928. It's worse than the Great Crash a couple of years ago. They really think that's going to happen. It is absurd. But in any case, I'm voting Leave, and it hurts me to do it. But for reasons to do with democracy, pretty similar to you, what I saw happen to Greece last summer told me that I cannot, with any good conscience, vote for that option. But on Cameron's term, in terms of Cameron, he's made his own bed and he's going to have to lie in it.
He'll be gone pretty quickly, I think, Bobby, if the result goes the wrong way for him, or even if it's close and he narrowly wins. I think his leadership of the Conservative Party is going to be short-lived. What do you think? Yeah,
no, I'll tell you something. I was working for a Leave campaign. I'm not going to say which one because we're on TV, but let's just say I may know some information. But in any case, he deserves everything that's going to happen to him, because for years he has pandered to the right of his party, wearing Eurosceptic clothes, but now he's naked. Now he's naked because he has to put on some other clothes, which he never thought he'd have to put on. He's opened Pandora's box, and those people on the right of the party, your Philip Davis, your Bernard Jenkins, what they are going to do is they are going to parade his head like Real Madrid paraded the European Cup last week.
What a wonderful vision, Bobby. A wonderful vision.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that excellent call. Adam is also in London. Let's hear from him. Adam, welcome.
Thank you very much, George. I think this referendum was a very good call by Mr. Cameron because of what he and Sarkozy did in Libya. And the referendum, both Leave and Remain campaign are both, let's say, they are all scaremongering. Because when you analyze the message that they've got, they are all talking about immigration. However, none of them has been able to lay much emphasis upon how to solve the immigration problem. Nonetheless, the immigration problem was created by the EU itself, which was sponsored by Mr. Cameron and Sarkozy. I remember the bill sponsored in the UN to get a mandate for the NATO, which has nothing to do with Africa anyway, if not in the interest of the imperialist and the Zionist governments. They wouldn't have gone to Libya to overthrow Gaddafi and steal all the Libyan gold, the reserves in Libya. So what I'm saying is, if Cameron is if Britain vote out, or if they remain in with less than 40% of the British voting population supporting Cameron, I think Cameron will be gone. However,
Me too.
Mr. Obama
Me too. Hallelujah. Adam, thanks for the call, as always. Mo is in London. Always worth hearing. Mo, go ahead. Mo?
Hi, George.
Hi, brother. Go ahead, please.
George, what's this referendum really about? It's not about immigrants from Libya or from Syria or from all the brown immigrants and black immigrants coming in. The real issue about this referendum is twofold. It's the 350 million they claim they're giving the EU, and also it's the Polish and the Lithuanians all coming in. This is the ugly head of racism again rearing its head because they want
why
to
is it
stop
racism,
the
Mo?
Europeans.
Why is it racism?
Sorry?
Polish people and Lithuanian people are the same race as me and David Cameron. So where's the racism there?
It's a form of racism, or it's what is prejudice against the other, the other speaker, the other language.
Well, maybe among some people, Mo, but every country has to have controls on immigration, no?
Agreed. That's the whole point. The failure isn't about. The failure wasn't the fact that all these hundreds of thousands of Polish came here. The failure was the agreements were never done properly by Thatcher to start with in the Maastricht Treaty.
Well, I'll let you back in, but I just need to make this point. Every country needs immigration controls, unless you're one of a very tiny number who believe in open borders, free movement of labour without restriction, in which case the rich countries would be full of the best workers from the poor countries, and the poor countries would have only the least effective, educated, trained workforce and a disproportionate number of women, children and old people. There's nothing left-wing about that. And of course, in the metropolitan countries to which, in a situation of open borders, all these workers would flood, would drive down wages and conditions for the workers who are already there, whatever colour they are, whether they're called Mo or whether they're called George. Am I right?
Yeah, agreed, George. But what's the real issue here? Why do employers pick Eastern Europeans over British workers? Because British workers don't want to work.
No, I don't accept that. It's because they work for less money, Mo.
No, George, they're being paid the European wage, the living wage.
No. Let me set you right on this, because I happen to know what I'm talking about on this, if you'll forgive me. Romanians earn 12 times less than British workers do. And if you go across all the countries of Central and Eastern Europe, the former communist countries, every single one of those countries is earning between 1/3 of British wages and 14 times less than British wages. So a job at the lowest possible rate in Britain is more profitable for a worker from these countries than they could ever dream of, Mo, in their own country. Last word to you.
George, the cost of living in the UK is way higher than their country, so even if they earn way less, they still have to pay all the charges. Most of their money goes on living, on electricity, on gas, on fuel. So this is not true, George. These are maybe a tiny minority who are earning less than the living wage. The majority of them earn what the legal wage is. And
they might, although that's debatable, be getting the national minimum wage. But for British workers, the national minimum wage isn't worth working for. Once you've paid for your dinners, your train, your tube, your bus, your babysitter to look after your children and so on, the national minimum wage is itself below poverty wages. And so if you're working for the national minimum wage, you are undercutting the workers who are already here. Mo, a pleasure as always to disagree with you. I'm discussing the European Union referendum, which is coming up on the 23rd of June. Less than 4 weeks from now, the British will make a decision of seismic, a real earthquake of a decision. I've got to take a short break for a news bulletin, but God willing, I'll be here when you get back. You're watching Comment with me, George Galloway, here on Press TV, still the voice of the voiceless. The governing Conservative Party in Britain is in a state of absolute crisis. Not only are they embroiled in allegations of electoral fraud, with 20 separate police forces investigating the conduct of their candidates in constituencies which they narrowly won, and which, if the police press charges, will almost certainly lead to those results being null and void, and David Cameron losing his parliamentary majority and therefore falling from office just like that. As a matter of fact, it's not just the Conservatives. Today, in a national newspaper, it was revealed that the Member of Parliament who defeated me in my then constituency of Bradford West is herself facing a police inquiry about malpractice in the election contest. We'll see where all of that leads. But the most likely place where it leads is a series of parliamentary by-elections across Britain, the most high profile of which would be in Thanet South in Kent in England, where the leader of the United Kingdom Independence Party, Nigel Farage, was unexpectedly beaten by the Conservatives, and where the police are investigating allegations of a very substantial overspend by the Conservatives in that election, above the legal limit, followed by the usual allegations of cover-up and lying to avoid being caught out. Now, that's just one of their problems. The other problem is the one we are talking about now. It is that the Prime Minister, David Cameron, is looking down the barrel of a defeat on the 23rd of June in the European Union referendum. Britain looks increasingly likely to vote to leave the European Union and perhaps bring about the downfall of the entire operation. And even if Cameron were to narrowly prevail, the Conservative Party itself is in such a state of outrage about the extremist way he has conducted his campaign to remain in the European Union, threatening everything from a third world war if we left, to pestilence, disease, and famine. The four horsemen of the apocalypse are all going to happen, according to David Cameron, if we leave the European Union. Which begs the question, why are we having this referendum in the first place, if the apocalypse will be the result if the people vote to leave? I happen to think they are going to vote to leave. But the Conservatives increasingly are demanding that David Cameron quit over lying and scaremongering about this issue of British exit or Brexit from the European Union. Let's stay in England. Hassan is in Rochdale. Hassan, welcome.
Hi there, George.
Go ahead. What do you think about it all?
I think that, see, whatever Cameron wants to do, he will do. Number one, when they first came to power, nobody asked for them to be in power. They managed to, you know, throughout the parties and X, Y, and Z, then they got in. So the question that I want to know is that why have we still got this person in power? If you went to work in a supermarket and you did something wrong, you got caught cheating or lying or stealing, you would be sacked. The police would be called. Things like this would happen. So why is he any different? Why can he just do what he wants? Nobody's going to question him.
Well, I don't think he can do what he wants. He's got people like Boris Johnson and Michael Gove and other big beasts in the Conservative Party gunning for him now. They've got him in their sights, and they're not going to allow him off the hook. And already their outriders are appearing on the Sunday morning sofa television shows and openly stating that it's time for David Cameron to go. How's the campaign up in Rochdale, Hassan? How do you think the vote's going to go there? That's in the north of England.
I don't know. I was in Rochdale today and I was down the road and I seen a big leave UK, leave the European Union, and it said Turkey will join with 76, a population of 76, and I had a picture of a passport on it. Well,
I just drove from Manchester to London this afternoon, and the only posters I saw were leave posters. I'm not sure if I've seen a single poster anywhere calling on people to remain. And this is the issue, Hassan. Those who want to leave really, really want to leave. And they're absolutely determined to vote. And they will vote. But nobody actually loves the European Union. Therefore, there's no enthusiasm in voting to remain in it. Am I right?
That's because they only show the bad points. They don't actually show any of the good points. Have you noticed that?
Well, you're on television. Why don't you tell us what the good points are?
Well, for one, we keep saying immigration, right? For a fact, there is more people from the UK that have left and went and stayed in other countries overseas than are actually here.
Yes, but a very large proportion of them are retired people living in the Algarve and in the Costas in Spain. And the people who are coming here are workers who are being exploited by rich businessmen and forced to work in poorer conditions for lower wages than British workers had obtained for themselves.
It's not very fair on any of these workers. You know, even if
I'm interested, Hassan, that you should say that, because you see, the people in Rochdale and in Bradford, for that matter, are people from the Commonwealth, by and large. There are, of course, Eastern Europeans in both places. But the great majority of immigrants that are in the north, indeed in this Britain, in the whole of Britain, are people who came from the Commonwealth countries. Now, when we joined the EU, we slammed the door shut in the face of the Commonwealth. And I spent many decades in Parliament trying to get visas for Indian people, Pakistani people, Bengali people, to come even to attend marriages and funerals. And it was like getting a camel through the eye of a needle. Well, someone from Bulgaria, who may not speak a word of English, have no connection to this country at all, well, they can come and go, all of them. The entire population of Bulgaria can come without a visa and set up shop and compete for work here. So Commonwealth people of Commonwealth origin, it seems to me, are the people who would benefit most from Britain leaving, because the traditional pattern of immigration would then be re-established. Hassan?
Yeah, I don't think that, see, the only reason why we've got all these Eastern Europeans and people from all these countries that come in here is because we live in a UK that allows for the people that live here or born here, they're now getting exploited. Why are these things even allowed? They shouldn't be allowed.
Well, you're right. I mean, why are the unions allowing it? Why is the government allowing it?
Yeah.
But the truth is, the unions can't stop it, and the government is allowing it. So there are people all over this country who can't get work at decent wages because it's a capitalist dream, you know, to be able to bring in people who in their own countries are earning vastly less if they're working at all, who can be persuaded to work for well less than the British workers. Hassan, I've got to go. Let's go to the comment wall and take our first tweet of the evening. Tony Hughes: the EU has created and maintained a welfare culture which has instilled an economic fear of leaving in the population. Well, there's not much of a welfare system now, Tony, not after now 6 years of Conservative-led and now Conservative government. Anyway, let's talk to Harry in London. He is a political analyst, Harry Finda, and he's going to give his tuppence worth. Harry.
Hi there. Yeah, so I've been listening to the conversation, and I think I mean, it's very interesting that I think that part of this debate has got to do with the fact that of this whole idea of London being the central sort of business hub, and the fact that I think it's a bit of an overarching statement to say that, you know, the whole of the North think that, you know, we should leave the European Union, because obviously we've seen the economic benefits to the North by the economic, by the...
I don't see that many economic benefits in the North, Harry. When were you last in the North?
I have family in Manchester, for example, and I know that they definitely have seen...
Well, Manchester, I'll grant you, is an exception, but there are huge tracts of the North that are post-industrial, that are sites of social desolation, that have been allowed to wither and die by a series of governments, Labour and Conservative,
of course,
devoted to the neoliberal idea.
Yeah, but surely this hasn't just completely got to do with the European Union.
No, of course not. No, of course not.
Yeah, definitely
but
not.
Harry, in any referendum, people are voting on a whole raft of things. They're voting because they hate Cameron, because they hate Osborne, because they hate the state they're in. They are voting because they don't like Johnny Foreigner. They fear immigrants. They are voting because they think the £350 million a week we send to the European Union could be better spent at home, and I certainly agree with them on that. They are voting because they think that Britain is ceasing to exist as a democratic political unit, with 60% of the laws that are going through Westminster actually being generated by unelected people in Brussels. There's a whole variety of reasons why people are going to be voting.
Yeah, but surely that then doesn't have to do with the European Union in a sense, but actually has to do with the fact that people are using this referendum as a political stance rather than an attack on the EU. So actually, it's not. This is being used as an instrument.
But it's a binary choice, Harry. You're in or you're out. There's no room for multi-option tick boxes here. You're either for leaving or for remaining. And how do you think, as a political analyst, it's now looking?
Well, I think I think right from the start we've seen that, this whole referendum came out of the fact that David Cameron did not want to lose power within the Conservative Party and actually put on the referendum simply for that. And you've seen by the language that he's used up until now that, him himself, though, he doesn't want to leave the European Union. And obviously there's been quite a large amount of campaigns that happened as a result of that. So in my head, I think that this is simply something to tick the political box. And I mean, whether, we should actually leave the European Union is not something that David Cameron actually thought would happen. And
no, in fact, is it not true, as Marcus, our first caller, said, that he didn't expect to have a majority? So he expected to be in coalition with the Liberal Democrats again.
Of course.
And he expected that they would veto any referendum.
Yeah. Yes, of course. But I'm quite, he's still been able to push this referendum sort of idea through, and I guess he's had to, but I still don't think that people are actually going to leave.
Well, the last four polls, Harry, have all shown a majority for leave, and there's still nearly 4 weeks to go.
Yes, exactly. But I mean, we can take those same polls and lead them to the general election, which happened, which said, that they definitely didn't say that the Conservatives would win by an overall majority. So I think we're all a bit skeptical about polls at the moment because unfortunately they haven't been able to predict rightly.
Now tell me about the internal situation in the Conservative Party. This question that I'm posing tonight is based on the growing, I won't call it yet a clamour. If something can be a private clamour, it is a clamour, but it is beginning to burst into the public domain that David Cameron, win or lose, is going to have to quit.
Yeah, I think it's because there's growing uncertainty with his Eurosceptic part of the Conservatives, and actually, I think this is again part of the reason why he had to launch this and continue to do this referendum. Otherwise, he probably would have been out of the job sooner. So I think it's a largely political move, of course, and people are calling it an implode of the Conservative Party. I wouldn't go that far, but I think the Eurosceptics are happy that the referendum has happened. Whether after they'll be satisfied with, in my prediction, a stay vote, I'd be very intrigued to find out as to why.
Well, no, unless it's 70-30, then they won't be. If there's at least 40% for leave, then we're into never-ending territory. Trust me on that. Harry, if you're so confident, you're now on the air, you're a London political analyst, would you like to make a prediction right now as to what the score will be?
Great. I would like to make a prediction for 65 stay and 35 leave. That would
okay,
be my
Harry,
prediction.
I'm going to have you back on here right after the referendum, and I think I'm going to have to laugh.
Sure.
Let me tell you, Harry, I predicted exactly to the percentage point the result in the Scottish referendum. On the Sunday before, on Andrew Neil's politics show, I said the result will be 55-45. It was 55-45. And I'm predicting to you now that the Leave are going to be at least 53% in this referendum. So you and I will return to this after the result is known. Is that a deal?
I would love to. I would love to, Mr. Galloway.
All right, Harry. You've been a good sport. Thanks for joining us. The Independent. David Cameron's tenure as Prime Minister in danger, regardless of EU result, Tory MPs claim. I do think one thing is for sure. If we win the referendum and come out of the EU, then the Prime Minister will resign straight away out of principle. I don't know if this is tomorrow's Independent or today's, but that is basically what I'm predicting too. Let's hear from young Robert in Peterhead. Robert, go ahead.
Good evening, George.
Good evening to you. Go on.
Well, obviously, George, there's going to be it's massively split in Scotland. Obviously, you've got a lot of people wanting to leave, a lot of people wanting to remain. Where it is in Aberdeenshire, which is where I am, and it's specifically around Peterhead, there is, from a lot of what I've heard from young people, especially people in my own year group, a lot of them do want to stay. But when I look, a lot of it does have to do with kind of age demographic as well. I mean, the older people, they're more likely to want to leave. The younger people, more likely to want to stay. But myself personally, I honestly don't know. I'm undecided. If I was able to vote, and unfortunately I'm going to be roughly a year and a bit too young to vote because the referendum falls 2 years before my 17th birthday. The way it works with me is I don't like the European Union. I absolutely detest it. I mean, I've seen what it's done to Greece. My grandparents lived in Greece for several years, and it totally ravaged Greece. The European Union destroyed Greece. The capitalist economy and the capitalist way of doing things in Greece destroyed it. And now in Greece, there are riots happening almost every single week. The country is in total chaos.
In France, my plane was diverted today because the air traffic controllers were on strike. There's strikes all over France and riots all over France. Exactly. Half of the young people in Spain are unemployed.
Exactly. Especially, I mean, I've got friends in France who have been taking part in the Nuit Debout, they're kind of like the version of Occupy Wall Street in France. It's where they occupy the city squares and things like that, and stage protests, largely peaceful, although some have become violent. And like myself being a very, very staunch left-winger and a very staunch libertarian leftist, I still don't know how I would vote in the European referendum. I mean, obviously it's an unelected body that is purely there to serve the egos of a few, and also to serve the interests of a few capitalists in Berlin and in Strasbourg and in Brussels. But at the same time, the way it works here as well, the things that the Tories want to do, that the European Union is preventing them from doing.
Have faith, Robert, in our own people, and stop exaggerating how civilizing the EU is. Let's hear from Doha, from Abdul Wahid. Go ahead, Abdul Wahid.
Hi, George. How are you?
By the grace of God, I'm good. Nice to hear from you. Go on.
Lovely to talk to you, mate. Look, I start with my prediction, which is at least 55% leaving the EU. And I cannot wait to see the Conservative Party, led by Mr. Cameron, get in. I hate to say humiliated over this. That is one thing. I am actually a Brit. I'm about to say that, but I'm originally from Libya, and I lived in the UK for a long time, but I'm in Qatar now. I went the other way. If I'm to advise anyone who's trying to get to the UK, it is hard. It is really hard. I was earning not a lot, good money, and I can't see people who come into work in the UK for the minimum wage to be able to make a living or have a family and so on. The other thing is I'm not comfortable to the idea that if we to say Michael Gove, Boris Johnson against Tony Blair and Conservative Cameron.
Well, that's right. It's not easy to follow Tony Blair into the voting booth, Abdul Wahid. It's not easy to put your faith in David Cameron and George Osborne and Goldman Sachs and all these bankers and all these predictors who failed to spot the crash in 2008, who told us we'd collapse if we didn't join the euro, and who have been wrong. Mr. Ben, the late and great Mr. Ben, said, you don't live in a democracy if you can't remove the people who are making decisions on your behalf. Vote Leave, I say. You can continue on Twitter.
Hello, if you comment your name and a Facebook, that's my number. And just make sure your television volume's set up to 0. So 0. Can you spell your name for me? Yeah, I know. You'll be directly put through this. phone number and then we'll call you back. Comment?
Can I have your telephone number? Okay, so I'm going to call you back to make sure